I want you to close your eyes. And a very interesting way to start off a video about Pokemon Draft League, but I want you to close your eyes. I want you to close them. And what is the first Pokemon that comes to mind when you think of Pokemon Draft League? Now, you might have some recency bias. You might think of Pokemon like Great Tusk, Iron Valiant. You might have started back in Unsung like myself, and you think of Tapu Koko, Zeraora. Or you might be an old head and close your eyes and think of Landorus Therian, Mega Gardevoir, the Oras Titans, right? We always close our eyes when we think of Pokemon Draft League. We think of the stars. We think of the LeBron Jameses. We think of the Steph Currys, the Luka Doncic. But those Pokemon and those stars cannot thrive without the role player. They can't thrive without the Pokemon that is coming in, not really affecting the stat line much, but really making a huge impact on the battle and facilitating those star players and letting them do their thing. So today, I want to take some time to acknowledge and show some respect and adoration for all of the great role players that bless the Pokemon Draft League scene. Now, the way we're going to do this is we have 3 different categories today. The first of which is going to be momentum guys, the guys that are going to pivot in and out, kind of getting your big breakers, pivots, as you'd say. Next is going to be hazard setters. And then the third one is fun. It's going to be luxury offense, which we'll talk about later. And that's kind of my favorite category. I'm most excited about that one. But starting it off, I think when I think of pivots, like in Pokemon Draft League, regardless of generation, Oras, Usum, Swish, SV, I'm going to think of Uxie and Mesprit. They are slow, bulky, not slow necessarily, but bulky psychic types that come in, have a great resist profile as well as an immunity to ground. They come in, they click U-turn, and they get out. They both have the benefits of getting up Stealth Rock, which is obviously incredibly valuable. I wouldn't consider them like the hazard setters section, because really I think what they're best at is coming in, clicking U-turn. Uxie and Mesprit have seen like a big like a resurgence in SV. They've always been good, but I think in SV in particular, they're incredible. Uxie is like the better pivot because of how ungodly bulky it is. Having access to moves like T-Wave and Encore and things of the sort is obviously really incredible. Knocking off annoying items, really just being like the ultra utility guy. And then Mesprit having access to what I think is the best move in the game and is like the ultimate role player move in Healing Wish. Giving up its own life in sacrifice in you know, an attempt to get a big heavy hitting teammate back out on the field at full strength. There's not much like less selfless play than clicking Healing Wish, and Mesprit is honestly one of my favorite Pokemon to do so. Now they do have their games where they can pop off and, you know, end up sweeping with Calm Mind or Nasty Plot or whatever it may be, but I mean, think about role guys in the NBA, right? Like Draymond Green has dropped 35 before in a game or something like that, right? Role players have their day. They definitely can still do their own thing, but for the most part, they are there to facilitate the rest of the team. And I think like if you're thinking about pivots, those are going to be your best. If I'm looking at my phone, by the way, a lot, I have like a big list of them. I don't want to like forget any of them. I want to stay on the topic of bulky psychics right here and go Jirachi. Again, another Pokemon that can definitely do stuff on its own. It can be that Scarfer, but really it is there to pivot. Steel Psychic is an incredible typing, and with access to U-turn, Thunder Wave, Rocks, all these things, Encore this gen, it is really the ultimate bulky pivot. You can obviously go Calm Mind, you can obviously go Scarf and try and cheese people out with Serene Grace, Iron Head, but its main goal on a well-functioning team is going to be that nice slow U-turn pivot momentum grabbing guy into a big breaker that punishes the steel type that wants to come in, punishes the dark type that wants to come in on, I guess dark types don't really switch in on a wall, but really, you know what I mean, right? Like the very easy switches you have into a Spidef Jirachi, doesn't really matter what those easy switch-ins are, because I'm going to switch into my Big Breaker, my Great Tusk, my Terra Iron Moth, and I'm going to punch you in the face. So I think that, Jirachi is a great example of this. Then we have the flying types. Ones I really want to mention in particular is going to be Mandibuzz and Corviknight. Really, they do nothing but click U-turn, especially in Gen 8 or Gen 9, where there's like less means of recovery in the sense of like their Roost PP was slash in half. These Pokemon's main job realistically isn't necessarily to like wall everything like they might have used to, but it's to come in, take 25% from a hit, lefties up if you're Corviknight, or be boots if you're Mandibuzz. You might click Defog, you might click Toxic in the means of Mandibuzz, you might click Knockoff in the means of Mandibuzz, but really we're just U-turning out into another big threat. Obviously we have tools to make sure we're not swept by a bunch of things. We're not like inherently passive on our own. I think that's an important aspect too. These bulky pivot momentum Pokemon aren't just going to be like passive blobs that come in and take a hit and U-turn. They have means of like punishing setup and things of the sort, right? So obviously that's a big aspect to it. And the same thing with the Pokemon we mentioned before, all of them have access to like moves like Encore and Thunder Wave and things like that. But these Pokemon job, despite the other utility they have, Defog and Toxic and all this stuff, is going to be coming in and clicking U-turn and getting out into big threat, and that's kind of be the name of the game, right? In draft league, it's very important to like keep up tempo, keep up momentum, make sure you're getting your offensive guys in optimally and for free as often as humanly possible, and these Pokemon are incredibly good at doing that, and I think they deserve their flowers. Despite, you know, you might play a whole 12-week season including playoffs, win the championship, and your Corviknight and your Mandibuzz might literally never log a KO, but it probably is going to be a top 5 most important Pokemon on your team because of how good it is at its very boring job. Another Pokemon that is a little bit newer that I want to mention before we talk about some old gen big mons or great pivot mons is going to be Pheasantipity. I think Pheasantipity, as much as I'm not a big fan of it, does kind of fit that bill. It has such an incredible resist profile with that fairy poison typing, which is really awesome, and it really does kind of impact the game even without doing actual damage because of Toxic Chain as an ability. It either forces steel types and poison types to come in, like absolutely forces them, or you might switch into your Pokemon that takes the hit well, it doesn't really care about it, but you get proc with that Toxic Chain poison, and your Pokemon dang near feels useless after that, because not only did you give a free switch into the offense, you just also got one of your main pivots into Pheasantipity poisoned. So I think Pheasantipity is definitely a Pokemon that deserves to be like kind of shouted out. I think it's in particular really good this generation because of how good Dark Spam is and like dark type offense is. Having a Pokemon that resists that and can grab momentum in the meantime is always going to be really nice. Now, I also want to talk about some older gen guys, guys that maybe have kind of fallen off a little bit this generation, but were like the epitome of this kind of idea in older gens. I have to shout out Unsung Rotom Wash, to a lesser extent the other ones. Unsung Rotom Wash was a demon. I don't think you realize how obnoxious that guy was when Papa Berry was at its prime, when it was getting, a clean 50% back. Once you finally thought you chipped it down, it might switch back in on rocks, then get back up to 65% or something like that. Like, it was unbelievably annoying trying to handle that Pokemon and deal with it, and it really did just Volt Switch around forever. Obviously, Volt Switch is being pretty much unguardable because the only thing that can block that is going to be ground types, which you can just pump, and you're probably there to check anyways, so you really can grab some pretty awesome aggressive momentum. You can also defog, again, providing great utility for the team, while also in at the same time being an incredible momentum grabber. Unsung Rotom Wash was moving different. Power Creep kind of caught up to him a little bit. He's kind of stat checked a little bit now, but man, when he was moving, he was moving. And then, of course, I have to mention Sword and Shield Slow Twins. Slow King still, to an extent, can still function this way, but it still also kind of gets stat check now. But it can, to an extent, with Chilly Reception. But Teleport Slowbro, oh my god, and Teleport Slow King, obviously, same thing, but those guys were moving different. Your physical attacker did not get to exist when Rocky Helmet Teleport Slowbro existed in Sword and Shield. It just wasn't going to happen. Goodness gracious, would Urshifu be so much worse if we could come in and just teleport forever, because not only were you sponging up any physical hit, if you couldn't really like threaten that Pokemon in like return, you could make sure you're not like 2 at KO, 3 at KO, just port out and get into something that can kill it offensively, a Scarfer that's faster than whatever, or just a strong breaker that's faster, and threaten it out, and you still have your Slowbro back because you can just regen it off. So yeah, obviously very strong in that regard. Alright, we have to talk about the hazard setters. I think these Pokemon are incredibly important. Regardless of the generation, the hazard game has an incredible impact on how we play and how our team can really force progress, and there's no Pokemon that I'd like to mention more than Tinglu. Now, I actually debated not including Tinglu because it is so good at its job. It is so unbelievably good and impressive as a hazard setter and a Pokemon that really chips down the opposing team that it's hard to call it a role player, right? But again, if you're going to look at your stat sheet at the end of the season, you're going to be like, wow, how many kills does my Tinglu have? 3? Okay. 2? That's not really like, we're not putting up all-star numbers, at least on the stat line, but the impact it has is invaluable. And I like to kind of think of it as like a DPOY, right? Tinglu is like the Rudy Gobert of Draft League, right? He's not really showing up, but he's very important defensively to how his team functions, and, allowing them to win the game. Now, obviously, it's not going to put up the most kills, but it's going to get up hazards, it's going to chip things down to where other things can pick up the kills. It's going to really hold opposing offense at bay. And I think it is like the kind of the perfect exemplification of the hazard setter in this metagame. Whether it be with rock spikes, then you ruination, you whirlwind things around, whatever it may be. Another Pokemon that was kind of introduced in this generation that I think is great at this, at least in the spike setting realm, is going to be Overquill. Overquill is a lot cheaper than something like a Tinglu, obviously, but it's incredibly good at setting up spikes and T-spikes spikes, and it's intim to buffer physical attackers. So like those intim helmet sets are going to be absolutely obnoxious, and it really is just kind of a nice glue piece. It's going to be kind of that, you know, sixth mon on your team, like sixth best Pokemon. It's going to come to 70% of games and really have a nice impact on the game. And again, there's games where you can pop off with an SD overkill. I understand that. I'm not saying it can only be the hazard setter, but if we're talking about it in its like most pure and like efficient form, it's going to be as a spike setter, as a T spike setter, and as a physically defensive pivot, and that's what it's really good at, and I think it deserves that kind of shout out. We've seen a lot of Bronzong and Donphan over the years. I think Donphan saw a really big resurgence early in SV, and it's not my favorite Pokemon, but he'll always get his government mandated 2 turns. I'll set up Stealth Rocks and I'll probably Rapid Spin something away, but there's also other utility, right? We can roar out hazard, or we can roar out setup Pokemon. We can click a really annoying knockoff, and we're also naturally decently strong, so like Earthquake and Ice Shard / Ice Spin are always going to be annoying coverage options and, you know, damaging options, while still being an incredibly reliable rocker. If you need a Pokemon to get up rocks, Donphan is probably one of the best ones to do so. So I think that's obviously something we should shout out. Bronzong, something similar, a little bit more passive than everything else we've talked about on this list, and for that reason, I think it's a little bit like more looked down on and everything else here. But if you need something really fat to set up Stealth Rock, Bronzong is going to be really good at that, and also has a great resist profile. We already talked about Steel Psychic with Jirachi. Now we add in another immunity instead of a weakness with Levitate to ground, and obviously if you heat proof tech options and things like that, you're going to be a great fairy check, you're going to be a great dragon check. Now obviously your Dark, which is a little bit tough in this generation in particular, but Bronzong has always been an incredible Pokemon throughout all generations, whether it be in Gen 6 as a really solid Mega Gardevoir check, whether it be in Gen 7 as a check to a lot of the dragons thrown off like Z Dracos and things like that, or being a decent check to things like recently I played a Kyurem Black and Unsung, and it was kind of an okay check to that, right? Or like a Latios or something of the sorts. Gen 8, I actually can't really think. I wasn't a big fan of Bronzong, in Gen 8. And then in Gen 9, it checks a lot of these scary fairies like your Iron Valiants and things like that. So yeah, honestly, a really solid Pokemon, just getting up its Stealth Rock. And then we have to shout out the Pokemon of the past. For Unsung, it's going to be Steelix. Steelix is incredibly sought after, not only for its great ability to get up rocks, but also checking the top of the metagame. It's a great check to Pokemon like Koko and Zero, which are like very omnipresent in that format and are kind of like just Thanos in those format. So having a Pokemon that can resist both of Koko stabs and take on Zero are pretty okay with a Chople Berry. Obviously, you got to be careful about like Z-Fight Focus Blast and things like that, but you can definitely take it on if you need to in a pinch, or at least pivot in once or twice. You're going to get a Stealth Rock, you're going to roar things out. Kind of is just like the reliable Stealth Rocker, that defensive presence, that Rocky Helmet guy to chip down physical attackers, which match massive physical defense, things like that. And then we also have Aura Registeel. Similar reasons, it's not only a good hazard setter, but it's a good check to the top of the metagame. It is one of the best Mega Gardevoir checks, and having one of those on your team is paramount. So having that to also set up Stealth Rock when you get that entry point in on Gardevoir, as you're going to presume that your opponent wants to get in their Gardevoir, you're going to find a chance to get in your Registeel, you're going to find a chance to get up Stealth Rock, which is obviously very nice. Just a very bulky and annoying Pokemon. So yeah, hazard setters are incredibly important. They are kind of backbone though, the best of them. There's a lot of Pokemon that get the move Stealth Rock, like Crustle gets Stealth Rock. I'm not going to pretend that Crustle is an incredible hazard setter because it gets rocks and spikes. No, because it doesn't have the same utility as something like a Tinglu has, something like an Unsung Steelix has, something like an Overkill has, or things of the sort. I almost mentioned Garchomp here, but Garchomp is also Thanos offensively and is still so strong. So I think that's kind of where we have to draw the line. Like, yeah, you could be defensive spikes and rocks chomp, but you can also just be like Scarf or SD and win the game. So pretty comfortably. So I think that was good to mention. Now, lastly, we have like the luxury offense. And before we jump into luxury offense, if you guys do enjoy today's video and you have been enjoying it, I'd really appreciate it if you guys went down there and check us out if you're subscribed to the channel or not. If you're watching this far into the video, it means you probably like Pokemon Draft League, and this is your place for Pokemon Draft League content. I think we have some awesome stuff, whether it be, battle videos or videos more like this. We're talking about, the more niche and nuanced ideas of the format and things like that. So if you guys do enjoy, please drop a sub. We're on our way to 10K, and I can only get there with your help, so I'd really appreciate it a ton. But yeah, jumping into luxury offense. What is luxury offense? These are Pokemon that don't really have a defined role defensively, right? Which is all we've been talking about today, is defensive roles and having those bulky pivots and having those hazard setters and things like that. But sometimes we can draft a team where we cover everything. Like, wow, my team is pretty structurally sound, but I want some more boom. I want some more power. And this is where the luxury offense comes in. It's Pokemon that might not fit a role other than the fact that there are going to be matchups where they are going to come in off the bench and they are going to drop a 30 piece on your opponent's head, right? It's kind of those 6 man of the year, those like the Jamal Crawfords of the world, the Malik Monks, those guys who aren't going to come to every game because they might have some pretty glaring defensive problems or some, glaring problems as Pokemon in general, but there is going to be a few matchups, maybe 50% of your matchups where you look and you're like, wow, this guy's unbelievably strong. And other Pokemon in this regard might even come to 80% of the games because they're that good offensively and you're able to patch up the rest of your team. And I would consider this a role player. I don't think this is like a main member of your team. It's probably your 7th Mon in your team, but man, maybe not for some of these. We'll talk about it, but man, are they going to provide a really, really big impact coming off the bench when they do come, or in just the prep phase where your opponent has to build and account for these Pokemon on top of the rest of your team that is, in theory, very, very structurally sound. I think a really good example of this is going to be Hoopa Unbound. I used Hoopa Unbound in a recent tournament like a year ago, where I drafted as like my 2nd Terra captain, and really the team was pretty structurally sound outside of Hoopa, and Hoopa would flex in as just like a ginormous breaker with like Terra Dark, Hyperspace Fury, and knockoff, or some really strong offensive AV mix sets and things like that, and it would smoke through teams because they had to account for my Terra and Amherst, they had to account for my Deoxys Speed, they had to account for all my defensive pieces and things like that, and they're like, oh wow, Hoopa's gonna come in and kill something every time I try and bring in my fat. So I really liked having a Pokemon like that, and I really like drafting teams to where you have the luxury of getting these big breakers that don't provide much defensive utility, if any at all, but man, do they hit hard when they come off the bench. Other Pokemon that are going to kind of like, account for this, that are like more on the budget side and that aren't going to come to every game, something like Lycanroc Dusk, really strong priority, really strong breaker, has no other job other than coming in and clicking a button, and it's not going to be good in every game. It's just not going to be. With its frail bulk, its terrible defensive, it's terrible defenses, as well as not being the fastest thing in the world. Now 110 isn't bad, but like not the fastest thing in the world. There are going to be matchups where it's just not going to be worth bringing. It's going to be worth bringing a different breaker, or a different, bulky pivot that kind of like helps your team out structurally. But man, you come in, you click that Choice Band close combat, that Life Orb close combat, or you have like a Terra Lycanroc where you go Terra Fighting or Terra Rock, a Cell Rock, or something like that. It's going to be hard to deal with for your opponent. So I think that's a really cool aspect of that Pokemon. Mamoswine is another one of those. It does have some defensive utility, but really, like, you're not drafting Mamoswine to be your rocker and your like defensive ground type. You're drafting it to come in and click Earthquake, Icicle Crash, and Ice Shard, and having it be pretty much unwallable. Like, the stab combination is unwallable for 90% of teams. You do have that glaring, like, terrible speed tier, and you're not the bulkiest Pokemon in the world. You got a lot of HP, but like that's it. But you can find those matches where you can come in and you can click a Life Orb or a Life Orb Earthquake, or a Life Orb Crash, Life Orb Shard, take a band onto there instead, whatever you might want to do, and you're going to do some damage. You're going to be really obnoxious for a lot of teams to deal with. So I think it's kind of a perfect example of it. A little bit more of a high-end option of that is going to be something like an Iron Bundle. Iron Bundle, honestly, is a Pokemon I have a lot of trouble using myself because of how poor it is defensively. It'd be very frail and having a big rocks weakness, and being it's kind of hard to find entry points for it, but if you can draft a team that allows Bundle to come in consistently and come in and click Ice Beam, Freeze Dry, and Hydro Pump consistently for free, you're going to have a good time, and you're going to put a lot of damage and pressure on your opponent. Now, obviously, this is a Pokemon that should come to more than 50% of your games. This is kind of like the upper end, what I was talking about, like those like 80% luxury offense guys, but still a very strong Pokemon regardless. And there's so many luxury offense Pokemon, ones I'm not even going to talk about in depth, but like Pokemon like Darmanitan and Old Gens could considered it, but some more like defined and like I guess higher tier options for this in Old Gens. I think back to Swish, Sword and Shield. And I think a Dracovish and Glare and Darmanitan, Pokemon that like at the beginning of the generation, people were like, oh my god, these guys are broken. Then you kind of play the gen, you're like, okay, they're actually a lot easier and a lot more exploitable than I originally thought. But man, if I get in my Dracovish and I click Choice Band Fish's Ren for free, I'm going to get a Pokemon. Or I'm going to force some very specific niche prep that's going to force very advantageous lines for me if I can take advantage of them. Same thing with Glare and Darmanitan. It's hard to get in, and Stealth Rocks basically kill you, but if you can get it in, you keep Rocks away. Man, is that Pokemon strong. You just get a Choice Band for free. So you could be Banded and Scarf, you could be Banded and Banded, you could do double band. Like, it's ridiculously strong how good, like, it's crazy how good that Pokemon is. It's obviously hard to use, it's hard to position, it's not going to offer literally any defensive utility to your team, and it's actually probably going to put you in a defensive hole a lot of the time, but it just might be worth it sometimes. And having that spark plug off the bench, the guy that can come in and just get 4 kills every couple weeks, man, is it going to be really nice for your team. Again, those like Jamal Crawfords of the world, just that spark plug off the bench, come in and drop 30 every once in a while and get the team going. That's kind of the luxury offense, and I think Pokemon like that are really cool and really fun to draft if you find the opportunity to. I think it's a lot harder in 8mon to do something like that because you just have less room for error. You have less room for like drafting these Pokemon. But if you're playing in like, you know, a traditional like 9 to 11 like Mon League, or you're playing Wi-Fi and things like that, it leaves a lot more room for these luxury offense Pokemon. Pokemon like Volcarona is another one. I didn't really like Righty Nose on that one, but another similar one. It has some defensive utility, but really not that much. But if you can fit it onto your 9 to 11 Pokemon team, there's going to be Quiver Dance endgames that you can find and things like that. So yeah, those are going to kind of be like the role players draft. Let me know if there's any like big ones you think I missed. Let me know your favorite role player that you like to draft and what you like to do with it, whether it be as like a slow pivot, rock sitter, your favorite luxury offense Pokemon. Let me know more videos you guys would like to see like this. I think they're so much fun. I'm always looking to do more stuff like this. I think it's a lot of fun. And yeah, drop a like if you enjoyed. Again, sub if you're new, I'd really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.